Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to Farnborough 2024. Very exciting that the team is here. What I'd like to do is share some lessons learned. So from a digitization perspective, I'd like to share a couple things. I'd like to share, one is, what are some of the challenges by accomplishing this? Two is, what are some of the outcomes that take place? And I'm going to do a primer for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then I'm going to ask a number of my colleagues come up, and we'll talk about, have a panel discussion around some examples, some of the challenges that have been experienced, and some of the outcomes and those things that take place as a result of digitization within our industry. Now, if you think about digitization, I'd make three comments. One is, it's easy to say. Two is, it's difficult to do. And three is, it has, by doing it well, it has exceptional outcomes. And I think you're going to hear that from a number of my colleagues on some of the outcomes that have taken place with partners that they've worked with or companies that they are part of, and the profound impact that it has had as they've gone through digitization. Right? So let's get started. My background is, I grew up as an engineer. I worked in the aerospace industry for 40 years. I was an engineer, program manager. I worked around the organization. If you think about it, I had a very difficult time of holding on to a job, so I changed a lot. Ultimately, I became the CEO of Honeywell Aerospace, and following that, in 2019, I moved into the digitization role to digitize Honeywell as a corporation. And the basis for that decision was that the CEO and chairman at that time saw a stark difference between the ability to make decisions either real time or near real time in an organization that was digitized versus other parts of the organization that took lengthy times to make decisions and were not fact-based in a timely decision. So as a result of that, I moved into a different role and led the effort to transform the business across the corporation. I would qualify by saying, think about what I'm sharing with you as a business transformation and not an IT transformation. And that's the basis for me moving into this role when I was within Honeywell. Now, if you look at the aerospace value chain, it's a remarkable, and we work in a tremendous industry when it works. So think about when it works well, how gratifying it is to get on an airplane or get in a fighter aircraft and do that mission. Think about how maddening or frustrating it is when it doesn't work well. And digitization is one of those things that can enable greater success in performance across the value chain. Now, the value chain that you see here on this chart, it looks very similar to the value chain of many industries, whether it's software-driven, hardware-driven, or a balance of the two, like the aerospace industry. But there's two stark differences between the parameters within aerospace and other value chains that look very similar. One is the safety standard is imperative, right? Safety within the aerospace industry, there is no tolerance for a lack of safety. When you think about designing something from a reliability standpoint. And then the second one is the dimension of time. The dimension of time is something that digitization really has a significant impact on it. So the iPhone, as an example, has a very similar value chain. It starts with market intelligence. What are those unmet needs that the customers want and need? And it goes through that process. But the average life of an iPhone is 3 to 4 years. Okay. In the aerospace industry, if you're going to develop a new fighter aircraft, a new wide body or single body, or new next generation rotary wing aircraft, those products are going to be out there for somewhere between 20 to the most extreme case in bombers of 50 years. So that legacy information is of significant value across that time horizon. So there's a stark contrast as to why digitization across the value chain is that much more important in these very long cycle industries. And oh, by the way, it can help preserve your business across the value chain. So this dimension of time is understated, or I think not well understood as compared to a short cycle business. Now, the other comment that I would make before I leave this chart is, you know, when you look at this graphic, it appears as though that the value chain is very, very connected, and it flows from one step to the next. Market intelligence, and then the beauty or the ideation phase around what could actually be possible to innovation. So now we've requirement document, et cetera. So I want to just think in terms of how does this look as though it flows. But the reality is that it doesn't flow that way. There's actually 4 phases and 4 barriers to information flow. And that stretches with different stakeholders. So, you know, if you look at the first part of this, you have market intelligence and ideation. And you have owners and operators, the customers speaking, these are the unmet needs that we have. This is why we need a more efficient narrow body aircraft that is going to have a greater range and less fuel consumption, et cetera. And the OEMs are part of that, and tier 1 suppliers, like a large manufacturing company like General Electric or Honeywell Aerospace or others, around those companies that invest in research and develop, from a research perspective, those innovations that can be ready for that next generation product that's going to be developed. Well, there's not a significant amount of information that is retained from that phase, other than the fact that now there's a requirements document. There's a requirements document for that system, subsystem, aircraft level, et cetera. And the innovation phase starts at a point where products or services need to be, as you're going into this, they need to be at a certain technology readiness level. You don't want to be ideating when you should be innovating, because that's one of the significant failure modes that are associated with the aerospace development cycles, is that we're working on products that the technology readiness level is at a 2 or a 3, when it has to be at a 6 in order to migrate to production ready. So the innovation, the hardcore design and development and industrialization, having a vision around what is going to be the rates that are going to be necessary, that the supply base can support at all of the tiers. And you can see that there is continuity between the first step and the second step via the OEMs. And there's, at this point, there's multi-tier supply base. So if you think about a system like a cockpit, an integrated cockpit system, well, there's one provider of that cockpit to a Gulfstream or a Dassault or a Comac. However, there are many, many suppliers that go into the design and fabrication of that integrated cockpit. And as a result of that, the information flow is fragmented, right? So if you think about this, it's I would say, a complex landscape. One is because there's multiple, as I've talked about, there's multiple stakeholders. 2 is there's multiple phases that are not congruent, and information doesn't flow from one to the other naturally. And then when you get to operations and support, it's very similar. You have a different set of stakeholders. You have operators of the airlines or the owners of the aircraft. You have service providers, whether they're large organizations like LHT or Lufthansa, or whether they are the tier one suppliers that have retained their aftermarket via power by the hour contracts and so on. And of course, you have the flying public that's involved in this. Now, if you think about the life cycle and that horizon that I talked about before, being between 20 years and 50 years, the preponderance of that time is dedicated to the second and the third work stream that's here. The first work stream, there's paper, it's a paper aircraft. Second and third work stream, you actually have designed an aircraft, certified it, worked very closely with the regulators, and it's in production. And then, of course, the last cycle is a decommissioning process, that the cycle restarts again, where the OEM is working with the market to better understand what are those unmet needs and how do they become satisfied with that. So that is the cycle that takes place. But if you think about the horizon and the time that is involved in that, the preponderance of it is between innovation to support, through support, right? So how does organizations be able to retain and capitalize on that information? So let's talk a little bit about the what. Because many of the companies, the previous speaker talked about the what. I'm going to spend a little bit of time about the how. How do you get there? How does Boeing get there? How does Honeywell get there? How would a company, an industrial company, get there that's going to provide products and services in this marketplace? Well, this industry, to a great extent, has been, there's been a lot of acquisitions and a lot of organizations that provide a portfolio of products to the customers. Cockpits are different than engines, are different than auxiliary power units, are different than environmental control systems, et cetera. So the way that this industry has grown up is that even within one company, it operates as multiple companies. When Honeywell Aerospace actually started to integrate on July 5th of 2005, there was actually 12 companies. There was 12 businesses within Honeywell Aerospace. And the infrastructure, the systems to enable that did not speak to each other at all. So, and oh, by the way, Honeywell is, I can speak to that because I work there, but Honeywell in no way is unique. That is a very common environment for most companies, both OEMs and others in the industry. So, it's fragmented. So what is the recipe in order to do this? Well, the first one is companies have multiple systems of record that don't speak to each other. So you have to do, this is the foundational work. This is where the foundation gets built, which is, this is ditch digging. There's no other way to talk about it. You're doing business process blueprinting, you're configuring, and you're rolling out different systems of record. But you're taking systems of record that are within a company and you are consolidating those down. So think in terms of, and these are real numbers, that when I moved out of Honeywell Aerospace in 2019, Honeywell as a corporation had in excess of 200 ERPs. Honeywell Aerospace had one. Okay, those other 199 did not speak to each other. So there's an effort around rationalization and consolidation. And this is all focused on how do I start to capitalize on information that is connected across those two big work streams that I talked about. That's the key, that's the vision. So systems of record, there's a proliferation of those and they need to be consolidated. So for instance, I can't speak for Honeywell alone, but when I left there, we went from in excess of 200 to 9 across the corporation. 9 was the right number, not 1. 2 is data warehouses, because this is where the genius of the and is going to take place. So now you're going to have to consolidate, similar type of problem, with applications, with servers, with systems of record, and with data warehouses, which is a business will set up a data warehouse. They will have certain information, whether it's an engineering information, supply chain, et cetera, but it's all federated, and it's not across the enterprise. This is about enterprise-wide solutions. Within the data warehouse, though, this is where the data that is coming out of those systems of record then are boiled down to what are the data models that are very important from a business standpoint. What are the data fields that are in there? There's actually millions of, when you consolidate this, there are millions and millions of data fields. And you can't curate all of those. It's an impossible task. So you have to actually make a decision. And oh, by the way, there will be iterations in the data warehouse, but the key is to set up an enterprise-wide data warehouse. All right, so now the landscape is you have far less systems of record. You have what you believe to be the right amount of systems of record. As part of that, you've consolidated or rationalized down your applications. And oh, by the way, your vulnerability from a breach standpoint is far less as a result of that. You have an enterprise data warehouse. Now you start to be able to move into data analytics, the business application of that information. Now, one of the lessons learned is that there are 3 core systems of record that need to be integral to this. So if you're in a leadership role, or you're participating in that, and you get to the point where these 3 systems are not a key element of your systems of record, go back to the previous step, because your team didn't get it right. They didn't get it right. There needs to be customer information from your CRM, the ERP, and your PPM system in there. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have other applications and other systems of record. But if these 3 are not there and they're not key pillars, you don't have the right answer and you're not going to get to where you need to. Because at this point, if you do have the right systems of record, then you're at a point where you can start defining the data models that apply from a business standpoint, the data fields that are most important, and you start to curate the data. And when I say curate the data, I'm just going to say it this way. Part of those systems of record grew up in Oracle. Some of it grew up in SAP. Those are different. They need to be curated and normalized. So it's almost as if you have 2 languages that are 2 different languages, and you want to normalize that into a common language. Okay, so by achieving that, then you get to the point where, what is this? I mean, other than the fact that you've had an enormous consolidation of your IT footprint, it's all about the business outcomes. And think about the 3 stakeholders. This is the way that I've always approached it, which is, if I'm not providing, by doing this, if I'm not providing value to those 3 communities, and I think in terms of, first, customers, okay? One is you're going to be providing more innovative products. 2 is your development cycle for that product, those products, is actually going to be shorter. So you have shorter development cycles. Your delivery performance from an industrialization perspective is going to be far better, because you're going to have visibility on where your risks are. And from a risk, lastly, from a risk management perspective, you will become a lower risk supplier for services in the aftermarket and also to the OEMs in the development program and in their production ramp up, et cetera. Second group of shareholders, the company, shareholders. Now, in all cases that I've been involved in, this has resulted in faster growth. And I always measured myself in not was how much we were growing, how much more we were growing than the market. To grow at the market in this industry is okay. But you need to be, in order to be really winning and taking share and providing more competitive markets and services, you need to set a bar that says that you're going to grow faster than the market is. That's the measure of success. And clearly, this has a significant impact, not only around revenue growth and profitability, but also from a working capital standpoint. And I think you'll hear that from my colleagues. And then lastly, employees. How does this affect employees? Well, less unfavorable volatility, less surprises, much greater predictability, and a much greater degree of transparency. So you can imagine when you improve the transparency on a development program or on production deliveries, and you understand where your risks are, it's a very different sense of managing a risk that is 60 days out than a risk that is 60 minutes out when you were just told that you're not going to get some product and it's going to affect a significant delivery, or it's going to affect, let's say, a software load that you're planning to deliver to one of your OEMs. So there's, in summary, I would share with you that digitization has been a tremendous, I think, advantage where it has been implemented in our marketplace. Two is, it hasn't been easy. Those companies that have demonstrated the commitment and the conviction get there. And I think that they're well positioned and are in a very exciting time period as machine learning and AI become a larger part of our future here. Those companies that are well digitized are in a different place. Okay, so with that, I appreciate me being able to share some of my experiences with you.